this is Crowland. We're a narrative gaming TTRPG channel, and today we're going to talk about symbolism. Symbolism, what's that? Well, I'm not going to appear in this video because the light in this office is quite disgusting today, but symbolism, it's a powerful literary technique used since the beginning of literature, and used correctly, it can take your RPG from just some goons bunching goblins in a pit into a memorable, powerful, and dare we say, even an artistic experience. But how do we apply this most subtle and effective techniques to games? Let's find out. Now, as I'm sure you know, symbolism at its most basic is taking one thing in a text, in a story. It could be an animal, it could be a physical object, it could be a location, it could be a person. But it means a complicated theme. It means a complicated set of ideas that are best not discussed exhaustively and are best suggested to the reader. Our current culture is actually awash in symbols. They tell us where the bathrooms are, which bathrooms we can use, when to cross the traffic lights, what's dangerous to touch. But perhaps it's remained even more effective in our art. It makes texts and games of texts deeper and richer and more meaningful. When a man is in jail, in a play or a TV show or whatever, and he's out there staring at birds flying free in the air, we understand it's not just birds he's looking at. We understand there's more going on here than just some chap checking out pigeons. The birds are free. He's looking at his freedom. He's thinking about the ability to move unconfined. And sometimes people can be symbols too. I think that Samwise from Lord of the Rings, he obviously symbolises Christian notions of service. Someone dressed in red, you see a character dressed in red, typically that is how we convey passion, energy, willpower, drive, eroticism, because the colour red has long associations in our culture with red, with eroticism. But let's take another Lord of the Rings character. When we first meet Aragorn, he is conflicted about his role as a king, right? Or as a king-to-be. He doubts his own strength. This is symbolised by that smashed-in sword. So when the sword is remade, so is he. He has accepted his destiny. Symbolism. It's pretty easy. But before you start really implementing symbolism, the first thing that you need to do is, what are the themes of your game? As a GM, this is actually, I think, one of the most interesting things for you to do, way more interesting than world building, is deciding what the themes of your game actually are. What do you want to talk about? What is important to you as the storyteller? So some things are almost built into RPG narratives. For example, the importance of cooperation. Just because you've got a whole bunch of people together in the same room, and if they work towards the same things without too much static, they'll get them. That's the power of friendship and the power of loyalty to the group. Oftentimes, NPCs just want to do whatever the hell they want to do without being told by kings and popes. Freedom from authority, that's a theme. But maybe you want to do something different. I mean, there's a lot of themes in the world. I always find that forgiveness, so that it doesn't come up a lot, especially in kind of more fantasy-based TTRPGs. I find that a really, really potent theme. Can you forgive your enemies? Then we need to talk about the fact that symbols are often subtle. They're a thing not to pound players over the head with, they're a thing to include and let them draw their own inferences from. We only have a limited amount of control over the world as GMs, and as such we shouldn't try to force our themes very much into the game, and therefore we allow symbols just to exist. You don't want to say, there's Drakespeare, the ancient home of the bastards of evil. It represents the horror of the bastards of evil. I mean, that's, let the players decide that for themselves. Sometimes you don't want to editorialize. A very overdone symbol, for example, that I would not do this just because it is overdone. So you see the vampire elder, and he's really, really good at chess, right? Because chess is a good symbol for intrigue and for skullduggery, because in chess you have to have a plan. You have to play the game wrapped up in feints and counterfeints, representing the kind of schemes this elder vampire might have. And like I said, I probably wouldn't do that because, it's on the nose. People don't immediately recognize it. And with symbolism, you want to play it lightly. You just don't want to just hit people in the head with things. Subtle, light touch, like a safecracker. The other thing about symbols is that if they're going to be really effective, they have to be recurring. Let me tell you about one of my favourite books, Chronicles of Thomas Covenant the Unbeliever, a very influential fantasy series from the 70s. It's about a guy who is taken away to a fantasy world and told you are the champion, despite the fact that he is the most ill-equipped person to be a champion of goodness in the entire world. But before he gets taken to the land, he meets this crazy old hobo who gives him some weird cryptic advice. And he's routinely taken back to his world, and sometimes he thinks about this hobo, sometimes he thinks about the advice. But eventually, we begin to realize that in fact, that's God, that's the creator of the world he's been taken to. The symbol is of God, and the advice is that sometimes God is just going to use you ruthlessly if that's what is needed. I think that's what he's a symbol of. And the thing is that this is never played too much. Every, 100 pages you might think about this old hobo, a line that he said might go through Covenant's head. But it's not until the end of the story that you begin to realize, oh wow, that's what was going on there all along. Whenever this guy turns up, whenever this old hobo turns up, that's a symbol of God's purpose for humans. I mean, I could be wrong, symbols are tricky, but that's what I'm talking about. It's just, you don't overplay it, you don't hammer it home, and eventually you begin to realize what the symbol actually is. Of course, these can be less ambitious than, the supreme architect of the universe. Say you give a PC an evil magical sword. It's a powerful weapon of the enemy, it hates puppies, it's called, nice person stabber, but it's very, very powerful. And even though it seems to have a corrupting influence, the PCs will probably use it, because PCs are PCs, they like to use powerful stuff. But it is a tool of the enemy, so what you want to do with something like that is that slowly the weapon becomes more horrific to look on, it's more frightening to look at in battle, it starts to make horrible sounds, and eventually that's probably going to start affecting the PC, right? But if you start off with the symbolism of the actual weapon itself becoming more evil, you are beginning to foreshadow and symbolize their forthcoming corruption of the PC. And you can do that in a way that is just way more emotionally powerful than, please take 5 evil points. Now, there's no list of symbols that I can pick that you should use, because anything can symbolize anything. I think that I always remember there's a great TV show that I definitely did a video on a few months ago, probably about 2 years ago now I think of it, called Monkey. And in Monkey, a stream of monkey urine represents primal cosmic arrogance and sin. Anything can symbolize anything. But a few good symbols for you to think about when you're talking about getting these things up and running, when you've decided what the themes of your game are. There's a few that just never go wrong. Colours, for example. Colours are always a great symbol and a very basic symbol to use. There's a reason why bad cowboys used to wear black hats. And Darth Vader, and this is a tragedy, is not in hot pink. Black is the colour of death, of mourning, of severity. It actually has longer, worrisome associations as that, Saturnian power, Nixian power. White is purity and innocence. The lamb, little fluffy white lambs, are white, and they are a Christian symbol of grace and of sin and of sinners for a reason. Simple colours, immediately you know what the emotional overtones of the people and things described in those colours are. And of course, you could change that, and colour symbolism does change all the time. Black eventually became cool, after all, the colour of badasses. From Chuck Norris to Jon Snow, they're in black. And they're not bad guys, but they certainly indicate that they're a slightly less typically heroic character. But again, you can change that yourself. Say that you want to have a bad guy group of fundamentalist, uncompromising, judgmental fascists who think of themselves self-righteously, and they wear white. They wear white cloaks, they wear white armour, whatever. White then becomes associated not with gentleness and innocence, but with severity and with fascism and with unholy self-righteousness. The symbol is yours to create. Numbers are always good. Number 13 is widely considered unlucky and spooky in our culture. So if you start describing, the evil hag coven has 13 members, and then you begin to realize there's 13 little girl children in the orphanage, you've immediately set up a kind of symbolic representation of evil and spookiness and wickedness. Now in the olden days, numbers had much more spiritual connotation. 3 and 7, holy numbers, the numbers of God. 666, it's a bad number that we associated with the devil, God's enemy. And in some ways, characters are symbols too. Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars, he doesn't have much of a personality, but we know that he is a wise man. It's not so much that he is a wise man, it's that he means wise man. We can, at least at first, trust him to give us reliable facts about the world. Gandalf too. Gandalf is another person that sort of symbolizes wisdom. And when they die, that symbolizes an end of certainty. I'm sorry, spoilers, Obi-Wan dies. I'm terribly sorry. Monsters can be symbols too. Griffins are traditionally linked with kings and monarchies and the divine right of kings. Unicorns symbolize chastity and innocence. Dragons, fear and awe. So let's say that you choose to pick do not trust authority as a theme. Not a terrible theme, and a pretty fun one given the nature of fantasy role-playing games. So we're playing a fantasy game, and in those days, authority is mostly symbolized by nobility, by kings and by queens, and by the church, because most fantasy games are just medieval Europe, which is fine. So you might set up actually, this is something that I should point out. So say you want to set up an evil baron who worships the devil or Asmodeus or whatever. Alright, that's a pretty good standard bad guy. Done a deal with the devil. Then you want an evil baron who's just a power-hungry bastard. Alright, he's just a no-goodnik. But he's not necessarily supernaturally evil. He's just greedy and self-involved and ruthless. Those are two good examples of authority not to be trusted. But then, you set up a good baron who seems like a great guy, but he just doesn't really think of the peasantry as people at all. He will let them starve if that gets his goals. He will send them off into war. Because the theme is not do not trust evil. The theme is do not trust authority. And authority can be wielded by nice chaps. Okay, so there you go. You've got 3 little cool person symbols, right? But then you might want to give that a little bit of extra weight. So let's combine. So say you want to get the devil baroness, right? She's always dressed in loud reds, rich red cloaks on her, red hair, her throne and her rooms are always in red, crimson, scarlet. The satanic imagery is symbolism. We think about those reds, and we tend to symbolically link them to hell and to these religious stories that exist in our culture. Or maybe you paint the good baron. The baron is a very nice man, but nevertheless a figure of authority. Maybe you make him in red to sort of foreshadow that he is also a person who we can link with these kinds of evil. You might want to do it a little bit differently. You might want to make his reds more martial in favour, big, loud, bold colours. But nevertheless, he's in red, and his men are in red. He might be someone not to trust. Then we can continue to combine this symbolism. So one of the barons wants a unicorn for his daughter to go riding on. Right? Pretty standard D&D kind of game. So the pieces go and capture a unicorn. But the unicorn comes back and he refuses to let the scumbag daughter ride it. The symbolism there is clear. The unicorn represents purity. Purity rejects evil, and so the unicorn is rejecting not just this particular person. The unicorn is saying, these people, kind of malevolence. That is a nice way of demonstrating a whole lot about your NPCs without actually just having to spell it out. The narrative tells the PCs and tells the players a whole lot about what is going on without ever, something as uncool and inelegant as a detect alignment kind of a spell. Let's think about things as symbols. Let's take that good guy Baron, right? He's a good dude, he's a great guy, he's fun to be around, he loves adventurers, he likes to take you drinking and gives you a lot of money. But he's also the kind of man who doesn't really care about, losing tens of thousands of his peasants in battle if that gets him what he wants. He just doesn't care. So you might want to have that during a scene where they're hanging out with the Baron, there's a big battle axe, huge big battle axe on the wall, all chipped, it's clearly gone through skulls in its time. And you just want to mention it. You don't want to hit people over the head. Just every now and again you mention how the Baron stands up and, the axe looks like it's hanging over his head. Generally speaking, I would only sort of brush on it 3 times, no more than 3 times. But what's going on there is that you're sort of creating this symbolic connection between the Baron and this, quite horrible, bloody axe. And you've done the characters so much so much of a service by showing them and not telling them that this Baron is wild and reckless and no one in authority can be trusted. And that, my friends, that's artistry. Do players always pick up on symbolism? No, they rarely do, at least consciously. I've been doing this stuff a long time now. I really like symbolism in my games. And they generally don't go, oh, okay, I get it. But what happens is that you prime them to trust NPCs that you think should be trusted as a GM. We've all had times where the PCs decide, oh, Dr. Really Nice, who owns the orphanage and gives all the children sweets, cannot be trusted. It's always a hassle, right? But by symbolically linking any NPCs to good and to trustworthiness and to things like that, you can move the campaign in ways that you anticipate without railroading. You prime the PCs, you prime the players of the game to trust you. And you will find that managing your game becomes a lot easier when you have created these symbolic connections between certain NPCs and certain places, and both the PCs and the players. So I think that you should really have a think about applying some symbolism into your game. Even just giving the enemy some branding, some cool occult symbol, or some hateful fantasy equivalent of the swastika for bad guys, the yellow sign, bloody hell, a lightning bolt scar, something that unites enemies in ways that are purely symbolic, at least at first. So when players see that symbol, you get kind of a Pavlovian response, Like, if everybody's got the twin snakes coming together over a black sun, then, and all those people are bad and have done terrible, terrible things, every time you see the twin snakes coming over a black sun, your PCs are kind of like primed and ready and expecting certain things, like the evil of the twin suns black cop snake thing. Anyway, you know what I'm saying. So think about branding your bad guys in a certain way, but also think about branding the good guys in a certain way too. If you give kind of every time there's a good NPC, you describe them in certain ways. Maybe we're always describing them in terms of radiant light imagery, a bit on the nose, but perfectly fine. Then, when you introduce another character who's also described in radiant light imagery, your PCs will kind of like, again, be prepared to accept that this is an ally that they can probably trust. Doesn't work every time, doesn't work perfectly, but it's just a good way of thinking about describing everything in your game world and what its utility is to your overall thematic structure. I feel like I haven't really gotten like halfway into where I wanted to be, but this video isn't long enough. So I'll leave it there. But what about you? Have you used symbolism in your games? Do you want to? Are you even interested in using these kinds of literary techniques in a hobby? I mean, I think it's fantastic. I think it works really, really well. But why don't you tell me in the comments? I'd really like to hear from you actually on this one. why not sub, and why not give this video a little share on the old Twitter or Facebook or whatever the hell is going on now. Anyway, this video is very long, and we're going to actually come back to discussing railroading quite soon. So, bye now.